Episode 4, Shadows on the Canvas. James had closed the case of the murder at the house on the hill. But his mind lingered there among blood-soaked rugs, whispering shadows, and paintings whose images haunted his dreams. That investigation had left a mark, deep and painful, like a scar that wouldn't heal. He had seen too much symbols burned into flesh, books that dissolved into thin air, figures staring from flames. The murder was merely the beginning. The tip of an iceberg concealing an abyss of ancient, terrifying secrets. Each answer he uncovered birthed a dozen new questions, and James felt the house on the hill hadn't let him go. He could still sense its breath cold, heavy, as if the place itself watched him from afar. Life, however, didn't wait. A few days later, he was called to a new case. At first glance, it seemed simpler, the theft of paintings from an auction. No bodies. No bloody patterns, just stolen artwork. But James's intuition, honed over years, whispered that there was more to it. Paintings don't vanish without reason. They're not just canvases with paint, they're keepers of stories. Symbols, sometimes curses. He knew each disappearance was a clue, leading to the shadows he'd already encountered. And this case, despite its apparent mundanity, carried the same mystic stench as the house on the hill. Echoes of the past. James couldn't shake the memories of the previous case. In the house on the hill, he had been more than a detective, had become part of something beyond human understanding. Every detail, the creak of floorboards, the smell of rust, the figure in the flames on the painting was etched into his memory. He remembered Crow's diary, its lines about rituals and voices calling to fire. He recalled the books whose pages whispered even when unopened. That investigation had changed him. He no longer saw the world as a collection of facts and evidence. Now he saw shadows in every corner, felt their gazes, heard their whispers. The house on the hill had shown him that reality was fragile, and behind it lurked something ancient, hungry, biding its time. The new case stirred unease in him even before he learned the details. The missing paintings weren't just valuables, they were links in a chain stretching from the library to the house on the hill, and now here, to the auction hall. James felt this was no coincidence. Someone or something was guiding him along a trail, leaving clues in the form of vanishing artifacts. He couldn't shake the thought that each of his investigations was part of a larger puzzle, where he was not only the solver, but also a piece on the board. The hall where shadows whisper. The auction house greeted James with cold grandeur. The hall was vast, high ceilings adorned with ornate molding reflected the light of crystal chandeliers, and black marble floors gleamed like mirrors. The walls were lined with unsold paintings, their gilded frames glowing in the dim light. Antique mirrors embedded in the columns caught the light and multiplied it, creating an illusion of infinite space. But beneath this opulence lay a palpable tension. The air was heavy, steeped in the scent of wax, old wood, and something faintly acrid like ash. James stepped inside, and his footsteps echoed too loudly for such a space, as if the hall were announcing its presence. The people in the hall, collectors, dealers, wealthy patrons in impeccable suits, moved with mechanical precision. Their faces were masks, smiles forced, gazes empty, voices hushed. No one laughed, no one joked. No one broke the silence that hung over the hall like a shroud. James noticed they avoided eye contact, as if afraid to betray their thoughts. Their movements were rehearsed, like actors in a play where everyone knew their role, but not who the director was. He sensed this auction was more than a sale, it was a ritual, with stakes higher than money. He approached the display of paintings slated for sale. 3 stood out: a portrait of a man in a dark cloak, his face obscured by shadow, a landscape of a burning city, with vague figures emerging from the smoke, and an abstract canvas covered in symbols resembling those James had seen at the house on the hill, circles crossed by lines. He leaned closer to the portrait, and his gaze locked on the man's eyes. They were painted so vividly they seemed alive, tracking him. James stepped back, and for a moment, he thought the figure shifted, as if it might step out of the frame. A disappearance without a trace. By the start of the auction, it was clear the 3 paintings were gone. They had been removed from the display in the early hours as the hall filled with guests, and no one had noticed. The guards swore they hadn't left their posts. The cameras recorded nothing suspicious, and the locks on the display cases were untouched. The paintings had vanished as silently as the books in the library, as the traces in the house on the hill without a hint of evidence. James examined the display and noticed a faint mark. Where the burning city painting had been, a trace of ash, as if it had crumbled from the frame. He ran a finger over it, and the tip of his finger reddened as if burned. He requested the camera footage and visitor logs. Nothing. Not a single outsider, not a single glitch in the system. The theft was too clean, too calculated, as if someone knew not only the camera placements but the guards' very thoughts. James recalled a line from Crow's diary, "They take what holds the truth." These paintings weren't stolen for money. They were taken to hide something or to use it. He began questioning the auction house staff. The manager, an elderly man with trembling hands, revealed that the paintings belonged to an anonymous private collector. Their history was murky. The portrait was attributed to an unknown 17th century artist. The landscape was found in an abandoned chapel, and the abstract piece had no documentation. It came from a closed fund. James asked to see the catalog, and in the portrait's description, he found a line, "Watches from the shadows." The coincidence with his own impression of the painting made his heart race. Mirrors that lie. James returned to the hall for a closer look. His eyes were drawn again to the mirrors. They were everywhere, tall, in carved frames, their glass darkened with age. Their reflections were peculiar, too sharp, yet something was missing. He glanced at his own reflection, and noticed his eyes appeared duller than they should, and a shadow flickered behind him that wasn't there in reality. He turned nothing, but the feeling of being watched lingered. The mirrors seemed to hold the memories of those who had gazed into them before, and that memory was alive, stirring in the depths of the glass. He approached one mirror and noticed a symbol carved into its frame, a circle with a cross. The same one from the library, the house on the hill, the missing paintings. His fingers brushed the carving and the mirror trembled, a ripple passing across the glass. James stepped back, and for a moment, he saw a figure in the reflection, the same one from the portrait. With burning eyes, he blinked and it vanished, but the chill that gripped him remained. Traces in the past. James dug deeper, requesting archives on previous art thefts in the city. To his surprise, similar cases stretched back decades. Paintings vanished from auctions, galleries, and private collections, all linked by occult themes or symbols. One of the missing paintings, the burning city landscape, had disappeared 20 years ago. It was later found in the basement of an abandoned house, beside the body of its owner, who had died under mysterious circumstances. The report mentioned a note, "The fire knows the truth." James recalled the inscription from the house on the hill, "Truth and Fire." He contacted an art expert, an old acquaintance named Lawrence, who knew the darker side of the collecting world. Lawrence revealed that the missing paintings were tied to a secret society from the Middle Ages called the Keepers of the Flame. They believed certain artworks were portals to forbidden knowledge. The paintings they collected held encrypted messages, capable of awakening forces better left unknown. Lawrence mentioned that the last person to inquire about these paintings was Edward Croth, same scholar whose diary James had found in the house on the hill. A labyrinth without end. James returned to the auction hall at night when the building was empty. The silence was deafening, the mirrors reflecting only darkness, but he felt he wasn't alone. He walked to the display where the paintings had vanished, and noticed a faint trace on the floor, a thin line of ash leading to a back exit. The door was ajar, though the guards swore they had locked it. Beyond it, a narrow corridor descended to the auction house's basement. James followed it, and his lantern illuminated a dusty old crate. Inside was a book, an exact copy of the one he'd found in the library, with the circle and cross symbol on its cover. On the first page was written, "They watch from the fire." He realized the paintings weren't mere loot. They were part of a ritual begun centuries ago, and their theft was a step toward its completion. The house on the hill, the library, The auction all were links in a chain leading to a truth too dangerous to know. James felt his own life intertwining with this mystery. He was no longer just a detective, but a player in a game, where each move brought him closer to the answer of the abyss. The mirrors in the hall seemed to watch him, their reflections rippling like water. He knew he couldn't stop. The missing paintings were keys, and he was the one meant to unlock the door. But with each step, he understood more clearly beyond. That door might be something that would change everything himself. The city, reality itself. His intuition screamed that he was on the edge, and soon he'd have to choose press forward or flee while he still could. A fate in the shadows. James stood in the empty hall, surrounded by a silence that now felt alive. Whispering. His investigation had become more than a job, it had become his fate. The paintings, the mirrors, the symbols all were part of a labyrinth, each turn leading deeper into darkness. He felt he was nearing the center, but the closer he got, the fewer answers remained. The mystery grew like a shadow, and he knew he would soon face what lay behind it. This case had changed him. He was no longer the man he'd been before the library, before the house on the hill, before the auction. Each step led him to a choice that would determine not only the outcome of the investigation, but his own life. He sensed the dark forces he'd encountered had already noticed him. Now, standing on the threshold, he knew there was no turning back.